Hello and welcome back to our continuing series, Democratic Capitalism, with local author Ray Carey. I'm Professor Michael T. Greenwood, Business and Economics Professor here at the Mount, and we're pleased again to be back with Ray. Ray, you know, our topic today is universities do your job. That's your topic, not mine, but I would welcome the view of an intellectual like yourself and an author of yourself. Spend a few moments with you today and our at-home viewers talking about universities and the roles that we are or are not doing in order to ensure the goals that you set forth within your thesis of democratic capitalism. I think to start this off and frame this segment, I'm going to ask you to read your hypotheses, Ray, regarding universities.
Fine.
Thank you.
They're the first stages of change. We discussed this conflict in capitalism, and in my opinion, the good capitalism and the bad capitalism. We discussed this army of potential voters that are out there if they were stimulated and educated to democratic capitalism. So the first place you have to look is to say, if we have ignored hypothesis number one as the beginning point for social progress, who's at fault? And I'm going to start with the university. And I wrote that they're an agent of change, that American culture, led by the universities, must train leaders and educate citizens in the functional requirements of economic freedom. Citizens with this knowledge can develop an agenda for structural reform of both industry and government. And I think when I look at the arguments within academia, I have on one hand President Bach of Harvard that said in 20 years of faculty meetings, I never once heard a serious discussion of how to better educate students to be better citizens. A few years ago, Dean Stanley Fish of the University of Chicago, I think he started at Duke, he's in a law school someplace now, but he gets in the New York Times whenever he feels like it. In fact, I think he's a guest editorialist right now. He wrote, no, that's not our job. Our job is to teach people to think. And you can guess where my bias on that subject.
So now we have two positions.
Perfect dichotomy.
Teaching to think and be good citizens.
Right. And why that I'm not quite sure what we're teaching students to think about, but that's my. At the same time, we have a famous professor, John Rawls, who I think was amazed when his first book, The Theory of Justice or something like that, sold a couple of 100,000 copies. He was a celebrity. And then he wrote in 1993, Political Liberalism. And then, in my opinion, he declared defeat and walked off the field with these words, whether there is or ever was such an Enlightenment project, finding a philosophical secular doctrine, one founded on reason and yet comprehensive, we need not consider it, for political liberalism and justice as a form thereof has no such ambitions. And that's where, as I not try to be a smart guy, that's when he declared defeat and walked off the field. On the other hand, you know, pretty much around the corner, another famous professor, Edward Wilson, wrote in Consilience that the Enlightenment got most of it right. So another dichotomy. Wilson went on further and said the sciences and the humanities have to stop treating it as a boundary. They have to treat it as unexplored terrain, needing cooperative entry from both directions.
And what is that unexplored terrain to you?
Between the sciences and the humanities. This is the artificial boundary that, in Wilson's opinion, doesn't get treated. Now, my opinion at the university, if you said, well, in your opinion, what's their job? Unify and elevate. I said, what's that mean? You know, but the idea that the universities are not fully engaged in the most important areas is either right or wrong, but it depends on whether you validate hypothesis number one or no.
And
or
what
not.
are those important areas that the universities need to be engaged in, Ray?
Does a student need to know the difference between asset inflation and price inflation? If they don't, they're not going to demand that the government stop speculation with borrowed money, which has caused every recession and depression in history. In 1818, we were a new nation. Well, 500,000 urban people were out of work. The farmers were destroyed. And at that time, we put people in jail because they couldn't pay a $10 debt. I mean, when we talk about recessions and depressions, we forget the human tragedy in every single one of them. And we know in 1929 and the Great Depression, most people talk about the Great New Deal, which if FDR pulled us out of our funk and the Democratic Republic experiment was threatened. But if you accept some of the radical ideas I proposed, the crash at 29 was just another example of the government not preventing asset inflation. And they went immediately afterwards and did what my friend Friedrich Hayek called secondary deflation. That is, the IMF did the same thing in Indonesia.
International Monetary Fund.
Okay.
Yep.
They rush in after the disaster has happened, and what do? They raise taxes and shrink the money supply 30% in 2 years. If they'd done that before, it wouldn't have happened.
It's like you view that
but they
as,
do it after, and it makes the problem worse.
Ready, fire, aim.
Yeah, exactly.
I see.